Good morning, everybody. We were just getting started in a few minutes. Okay, good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us this morning on our webinar, where we're going to be talking about the principles of running a successful project. So just quickly to go through some etiquette for the webinar, just to say that this session is being recorded and it will be available on demand on the Hart Square website later on today. So please feel free to share with any of your colleagues or watch again. As you'll see, there is a Q&A box, and that's for any questions that you have for myself or for Lisa. And please put them in at any time throughout the session this morning. We do want this to be as interactive as possible, so please do put those in and we will try and answer as many of them as we can throughout the session. You'll also see that there's a chat box, and that's for any more technical questions, technical support questions, or general sort of questions for Hart Square. So my lovely colleague Rebecca is in the background and she'll be keeping an eye on that. So please do put in any questions there that you have. So I'm Joyce Harman. I'm Senior Client Relationship Manager at Hart Square, and I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by my colleague Lisa, who is an extremely busy person. So I'm delighted that she took the time today to join us. Lisa, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Good morning, I'm Lisa Ellison, so I'm a Senior Business Change Consultant at Hart Square, working with Joyce. Lovely to meet you all.
Thank you, Lisa. So just quickly, for those of you who are not aware of Hart Square, and just to say that we are a consultancy practice and we work only in the not-for-profit sector. And it's something that we're very, very passionate about, and that ensuring that we have that impartiality around that everything that we do, and very often working on projects with clients as acting as very much their critical friend and helping guiding them through the various projects that they're working on. So before we get started, I just want to run a quick poll. So this is just, if you bear with me while I pull it up, this is really just to give us an idea of who's with us this morning, and just to kind of understand what stage you're at in your project. So if I could just ask you to please all fill that in, I would be grateful. So what we're really looking at is, what stage are you at? Are you very much, thinking about a project, putting together a business case? Are you looking at the requirements gathering phase? Have you finished your project and you're thinking about what you need to do around benefits afterwards, or you're halfway through? So interesting at the minute, it's looking like a lot of people at that requirements gathering stage, and a good lot of people at mid-implementation, a few business case. Interestingly, none are looking for technology partners. I'm just going to give that another second or two, and then I will share the results. Okay, so if I just end the poll and let me share the results. So yeah, interesting. So the majority of people are at that requirements gathering phase. So that's really good. It's making sure to get that solid foundation for working on the projects. And then quite a few people are mid-implementation, but interestingly, some people at that very much that business case. So hopefully we'll be able to give you some pointers that might be useful for working around that. So let me just stop sharing that. So wanted to just really cover off, obviously, as you can imagine, when running projects, there's endless things that we could talk about, and we could be here for days on end, but we want to really keep this quite as concise as we can for this morning. And I'm eager to bring in Lisa as soon as possible, because of all Lisa's years of experience to really, for her to share some of her knowledge with everybody. But just thinking about some of the things that we see on projects that are really key to be thought about right from the start, that will really help with a solid foundation. So thinking about people and change, one of the biggest challenges that we see in project is that people think the project is all about tech. They focus on the tech, they focus on the tech partner, and they forget about the people. You cannot do a technology project at people, you have to do it with people. There's going to be significant change on a project, impacting on business as usual, impacting on all the different stages of development. So you need to think about that in a lot more detail. So I'll talk about that in a bit more detail later. Resources, for any of you who've been on previous webinars with myself will know that I would talk about resources an awful lot, but it's really important at the start of a project to identify the different resources that you're going to need on the project. Also, as well, thinking about resources, about the skills that are required for those resources. So I'm going to talk about that in a bit more detail. Then project governance and monitoring your project. What are the key documents that you're going to need? So I'm going to talk about that in a bit of detail. I'm obviously not going to go through every document that you absolutely need, but very much looking at some of the key things that we think that are a solid foundation for any project. Then one of the areas that always gets underestimated is discovery and sign-off. There's often this misconception that because you've done requirements gathering, you don't really need discovery, or people don't really understand the importance of discovery. So I want to talk about that in a bit more detail. Then data migration, again, it's a topic I could talk about forever, and we have run whole separate sessions on it. So I'm not going to go into that in much detail today, but I know that Lisa's going to touch on that when we get to speak to her. And then, getting the best out of your relationship with your new technology partner, just going to touch on that as well, because at the end of the day, it is a partnership. You want a good relationship going forward, and it's really important to get that sorted out right and start off on a good footing. So we do a research study every couple of years, and actually at the end of this session, we are doing a new one at the moment, so we're going to be asking you to partake in that. But this is from our previous research study, which was looking at why do technology projects succeed or fail, why have they not been as successful. And I just think it's an interesting slide to show, because the biggest challenge that came up, the biggest percentage of why projects weren't successful was around processes. So there wasn't a proper resource put on the project, there was bad definition of the requirements, there was trying to recreate inefficient processes in the new systems. So processes and not managing that properly had a huge impact, and that was the biggest reason why the projects weren't successful. Then after that then was strategy. And it might seem a ridiculous thing to say that, people embarking on a big project and they don't have a strategy, but it's actually very common. From the conversations that we have with people, there can be a lack of, what are the clear goals and objectives and benefits of what it is you're trying to achieve from this project. So a clear lack of strategy is a big issue on projects, which ties in then to the next one, which is people. And this comes down to where people have been not clear on the goals and objectives of the project. They've not been bought into it. They've not been consulted. Senior management haven't bought into it. So therefore, that leads to issues further down the line for lack of user adoption, poor implementation. Your user acceptance testing isn't as good as it should be. There isn't the right focus on the implementation. So the people side is one of the really big ones as well. And for me, the interesting one is always around technology. Technology was only 16% of this. And I suppose the important point is the difference here when we're talking about technology is that it's not, the reason why projects fail is generally not because the actual physical technology. It's because either there's been poor functionality built in, which comes back to poor definition of requirements, or a high need for customization. So, looking at this research study, and it'll be interesting to see what the results come out after we complete the next one. But, the people, the process and strategy are the big drivers behind all of that, which kind of will cover some of the things we're looking at today. Thinking about, change management, you hear this expression bandied around a lot. And what is it? It's really just a set of processes and tools and techniques. It's all about people, and it's all about thinking about how you need to bring people into the project and bringing them along with you. So it's very important when you're thinking about your project that you have a very much an engagement approach, taking that an engagement approach through the change that you're looking to do. So some very basic high level stuff here when thinking around change management, around you need to have senior management buy-in, and communication is vital. The senior management need to be communicating with the wider team, with the wider staff, to say this project is important, why we are doing it, all of those kind of things. Setting realistic timelines, don't go live over Christmas, or don't go live or do user acceptance testing when you're running a big annual event, or if it's renewal time. Sounds very obvious, but this does happen. So again, understanding and engaging with your key stakeholders to say, what are the key points that need to be blacked out? Thinking about the capacity for business as usual, because the day job still needs to be delivered while you're delivering this project. So talking to the people who are going to be involved in this project to understand what support are they going to need, and listening to that and being realistic about it, because there is a huge amount of work on these projects, and sometimes it might be that backfill is needed or various extra support. So thinking about that, how are you going to do business as usual as well as delivering this project? Again, an obvious one, having that clearly defined set of outcomes and benefits right at the start, particularly for those of you who said, you're at that business case stage. Why are you doing this project? What is it that you're trying to get out of it at the end of the day? benefits, people often think it's about, well, let's just get our data in one place and make it an easier to use system. But there's so much more. Think about the different teams that you have within the organization. What is it that they're going to try to achieve? Thinking about your members or your funders, what difference is it going to make to improving your processes? So have a very clear idea about why you're doing this, document it so that so that you can monitor throughout the whole project. And then constantly throughout the projects can be a very long time. Constantly reviewing how things are going, how do people need extra training, constantly engaging with people, having check-ins, making sure and giving them that support and help that they need. And again, when it comes to resources, making sure that right at the start you've identified the resources, you have had the conversations with those people so that they're aware they're going to be allocated whatever the various roles are, and to make sure that they actually have the skills to do it. So when we talk about project resources, people often get horrified when we say about the amounts of the roles that are needed, because we would say for every project, and I know Lisa will definitely comment on this later, the key kind of roles that you need is a project sponsor, a project lead, your project manager, or data or technology lead, and your subject matter experts. Now, I know for some smaller organizations will say, well, we just simply don't have that, we can't do that. Possibly there sometimes can be some shared roles, but these are the fundamental foundations of any project, and these roles are very, very important. So you need to make sure that you've identified who is going to be responsible for all of these different roles. And then once you've done that, putting together your governance, thinking about, your project board meetings, who's going to be attending that from this group, how often are they going to be, what are the key milestones and all of that, and developing your whole communications plan around that. So resourcing is very, very important. Thinking about documents, now so that this is by no means all of the documents that you need on a project, but just some of the key ones I wanted to highlight. So you'll hear often about a PID, a project initiation document. This is a really good document, and I would say, and I'm sure Lisa will say that every project absolutely should have it. It's defining what the project is going to be all about. So it's got the objectives, the assumptions, the roles, all of that kind of thing. So it's very a key project and should be put together right at the start of the project. It should be a live document. It shouldn't be shelfware. It should be constantly reviewed throughout the project. Your project plan, as any project manager will say, is the key to all of this. This links the resources to time. And it's very clear what the dependencies are on the client side and the partner side, and you're going to live and breathe by this plan. So it's really, really important. Your RAID log or your risk log. So this is, very much identifying, any risks that you have on the project, any decisions that have been taken about those risks, how they're going to be mitigated. Very important that you have this throughout the project and you're looking at what status that your project is at. Communications plan, again, these can be of varying different types, but just to make sure that you've put one together to show that you've thought about communication. How are you going to communicate to the wider team? Project board papers, very important that you have your regular project boards, and then you're sending out the papers and information from them, so it's all documented, any decisions that have been made. And status reporting, up to the project sponsor, up to the wider board, where are we on the project? How healthy is the project looking? Is there any other risks or things that we need to flag? Then very briefly, just wanted to talk about on discovery. So this is an area where very often, and I do have this conversation a lot, and I'm sure that Lisa does too, is around people say, well, I've done my requirements document and I did my invitation to tender document, so why do we need to go through all of these requirements again? The requirements in the invitation to tender document are the starting point, but the technology partner needs to come in to investigate in much more detail, to understand exactly what it is that you need, so they can then go away and cost and then build the system. So from the discovery workshops, the partners are going to create the specific project specification, which is going to then involve further workshops. It's going to be agreed in detail. You're going to sign off these requirements and you're going to get detailed costings. So the important point is this point that you're going to be approving and signing off the specific budget, the specific timeline for this project. So this is really the kind of final legal agreement between both parties. So it's really, really important that the time required is dedicated to this stage, because it is the way forward. Also at this stage, making sure that if you're not clear about anything, that you ask, because this is the specification you're signing up to. What you don't want is to sign up to a specification and have arguments later. So it's worth putting in the time and effort at discovery. This is the time to ask if you're not sure, because you're then putting your contract together around it. And then finally, before I bring Lisa in, looking at getting the best from the partnerships. Again, it is quite obvious stuff really, but it is a partnership. This is why we don't say suppliers, it is a technology partner. You want to make sure that they're providing the best quality of service to you, that you're getting the best value for your money, because we know with all of these projects, these are not cheap projects to do, and you need to make sure that you can show that you're doing everything, that you're not wasting money, that everything you're doing is getting value, and that the partners can show that. As I said before about the importance of getting that agreement and sign off of the discovery, really important to have open and honest communication. Because where an awful lot of projects do go wrong is where there's bad communication, or the communication breaks down between the client and the technology partner. Open and honest communication, which just makes such a difference. It avoids arguments later down the line. You really have to see it as a close relationship. Very often, and I do get asked this a lot, saying, well, the technology partner has a project manager, therefore we don't need one. But that's not the case. Their project manager is going to be very much focused on delivering off the technology, delivering against their specification. But you need a project manager on your side who is basically fighting your corner, who is making sure that things are done and nothing is being missed. And then those two project managers will work together really, really closely. So it's very important that there's a good relationship, and also then understanding of what are the clear roles and responsibilities on both sides, again, to avoid any disagreement later. And then finally, making sure that the contracts and agreements are aligned against your business needs, that you're very clear on what what your the targets are going to be, and what the service levels or agreements are going to be. So again, that there's no arguments later. So enough from me. I'm going to bring in Lisa. So Lisa, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background?
Sorry, just trying to find the unmute button there. Yes, so I've been working in the NFP sector for about 8.5 years now. And before that, I was working in the financial sector, working on projects as well. So I've been working in projects for more than 15, almost 20 years now. But I initially worked on projects as a SME on a project in the organisation I was working on. And then I developed and trained into a business analyst, then into project and programme management. But during my time working in the NFP, I've been working with more than 25 membership charities, councils and trade union organisations. More recently, or the most recent ones, I suppose, are the Royal College of Midwives, Royal College of Occupational Therapists, Samaritans, I help them out, Prospect, which are a trade union organisation, and Tower Hamlets.
Perfect. So lots of experience. That's why we've got you here this morning. So I was thinking about some of the projects that you've recently been involved in. What would you say has been the biggest challenge in getting the project started?
There's a few, but I'd say the first one is usually the contract, having the contract signed. So as part of your partner selection, there should be a draft contract that should be provided to you. And you should definitely review that before you make any selection to a partner. And then make any questions, put any comments forward on the draft contract at the earliest opportunity. But as soon as you've selected your supplier, we should be asking for a contract straight away before you get started and kicking off in your implementation, and get that signed and done. Partners sometimes will happily do a few discovery sessions without the contract being signed, but it's not ideal. And that often kind of creates some challenges sometimes, especially with the relationship as well. So it's a very quick win, but it is quite a lengthy process. So I would definitely recommend that you work on the contract at the earliest opportunity and make sure that you're happy with it and get it signed off. But I suppose some of the other key challenges really are the resource and availability. It's definitely one that comes up all the time. you know, often organisations, they don't know how much time and effort that their team are going to be needed. Ourselves, Hart Square, when we go in and we're talking to a client, we will give some recommendations, especially around some of the key roles and the sponsor and the leads and the data lead, etc., and how much time and effort would be required. But when you're going into an implementation, you can ask your PM to say, right, across the whole of the project, how much time and effort do you think the team are going to be required? And it's really important to kind of have a sense of that early doors. Because you do need to consider backfill, especially for some of your significant areas. If you're replacing a CRM and it's a membership or your supporter care or your donor teams, you know, normally a lot of their time and effort is going to be required. So they're kind of some ones you can easily identify. But also making sure that you've got the right skills as well of that resource. Again, that's a really tricky one. It's a conversation we should be having early doors with you again, as part of your implementation, or your PM should be discussing that with you to make sure you've got the right people in. But having your project lead involved in the project should definitely input into that, because they tend to know the teams, the staff, and who is really having the right attitudes and behaviours. If they've never done a project before, that you shouldn't shy away from bringing them in. Skills can be taught. We can guide them, you know, we can support them through the process, but having the right attitudes and behaviours into a project is really, really important, because it's just to make sure that they champion the project, because there will be hard times, so that's really important. So just make sure you've got enough people, the right roles in place, the right resources in place with the right skill sets, and make sure that they have availability as well. But also one of the key challenges, and I suspect this will come up a few times, is buying into different ways of working as well. So I think Joyce mentioned it just a moment ago in her slides, but you know, with the change management, it's really important, because quite often you're getting a new solution or you're replacing your solution, and there are different ways of working, and people be set in their ways. But the partners also have a real responsibility of making sure that you're brought into those new ways of working, and it's explained to you the benefits of those new ways of working. But that's often a challenge at the start, and that can go back and forth quite a bit, and getting people brought into those ways of working. I suppose really the final point is the partners as well. So, you know, they are your trusted partner. They should be treated as your trusted partner, but quite where the partners come into you and they talk to you about new ways of working and they want to do it in a certain way, trust them and go with them, because they are your trusted partner. You're spending a lot of time with them. They've done this before. Your PM should have done this before as well. So again, trust what they're saying, and, you know, be led by them, and trust you that they know what they're doing as well. So I say they are kind of the key challenges really when we're starting a project.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, you know, that's a really important point about, you know, the partnership and trusting them, and, you know, that when you brought in expertise, you know, you brought them in for a reason. So use them, you know, because otherwise it's kind of a wasted resource. And yeah, absolutely. As you say, you've touched on about the resourcing. So you've mentioned sort of some of the roles, but, you know, what would you say, you know, are the key roles, you know, on a project that every project should have?
Well, I'd say, first of all, project manager. So the partners come along with their own project team. So absolutely they do have, but I think within the interests of the client, the organisation, getting your own PM is really, really important to make sure you protect the interests of your organisation. But really, they're the ones that are going to prepare your team. They're the ones that are going to be invested in your team, guiding them, supporting them through these processes. You know, a good PM will be making sure that they know what to expect next and what's coming up. They should have forewarning of activities that they need to complete. They should be chasing them. They should be, you know, supporting them in their actions and getting the work done, and holding those the team to account and to their responsibilities as well, but also to the supplier. So project manager, really, really important to make sure you ensure effective and collaborative communication with the team and any third parties that are a core member of your team. Sponsor, really, really important. I'll probably talk about sponsor role quite a bit today. It's where the focus should be, because especially with decision making, that's why the sponsor is just so important. But they need to be senior, and they also need to be empowered, for sure. Ideally, they shouldn't be a CEO or managing director. I would shy away, or I would ask, is that the right person to be the sponsor, just purely because of the time and effort that's going to be required from the sponsor. And also, if they are, you know, the CEO or the managing director, they don't really have anybody else then to escalate to. So it's just making sure that you've got those layers of escalation if required. Hopefully that will never be required, but it's really good learning for any director. I think at that level is where you should be pitching at, or ahead of, depending on the size of the organisation, especially if they're in a developing role. Also, the project lead or the product owner, depending on the methodology that you're taking with the project, really important. And it's also really important to distinguish between the difference between a sponsor and a project lead. So a project lead really is a point of contact for all the subject matter experts in your project. They are the point of contact for your project manager as well as your sponsor, but they help mitigate against all the gaps and the silos across the whole of the team. It's making sure everybody comes together. They are the key person to champion the project as well as the sponsor. They're the ones that will support your team, making sure that they're doing everything, but also have oversight of absolutely everything. And I always say that they should always know everything that the project manager knows. So it's that mitigation there, because if anything happens with the project manager or the project lead, then they need to know exactly what's going on. So then the project is unaffected. But the sponsor and the lead, as I say, the two key roles there, just to say that we often get challenged to say, can't they be the same person? As a standard, absolutely they shouldn't be, because the sponsor needs to think strategically. They need to have the interest of the organisation's goals. The project lead is in the detail. It's in the detail of the oversight of the teams. Put the two together, it's different. It's very difficult to distinguish and get effective decision making being made, but also it will consume that one person across the project as well, because it will be a full-time job effectively.
Yeah, no, I mean, I completely agree, Lisa. And as you say, it's a question we get asked all the time, and that people don't like when we push back on it. But you know, that's a really good definition of what the difference is, because I think often people don't understand what the difference is in the roles. Yeah,
they're two really, really key roles, in my opinion, absolutely essential for any successful project.
Yeah, and then thinking back, you know, obviously, as we know, these projects take a long time. There's no point pretending they don't. You know, how do you know, get people to prioritize the delivery of the project? You know, they're already very busy. You know, how are you going to get by? And is there any kind of things that you do to try and, you know, sort of help with that?
Yes, so there are a few things that we can do. I mentioned before, just a good PM will always be able to tell you exactly how much time and effort across all the individuals involved in the project, how much time and effort we think that's going to take. Obviously, that's going to be an estimation because you can't foresee what's going to happen. But for what we plan for, we can definitely provide that. So I think that's really important, to make sure that it's understood how much time and effort is going to be required for them to support that. But I think, yes, it does take up a lot of staff time. It is unforeseen where you get queries come up. Sometimes there is a lot of emails. So I think also what's really key is making sure you've got collaborative communication across the project. From my own personal experience, this is something I've really worked on the last couple of years, because it has such a huge impact. Keeping the team informed of the information and what they need to do next, and make sure they're aware of what's coming up next. It helps them manage their time more effectively as well. And then making sure that we're providing them the guidance that they need to be able to do that, so they can actually manage their time. But priorities are so important. So right at the beginning of any project, you know, ideally, internally, communication to go out to say, you know, we're embarking on this new change, this new project, this is what we're trying to achieve. This needs to be a priority for the organisation. I say it needs to be a priority. It's up to the organisation to set that, but for it to be a success and to have every chance of it being a success, it really needs to be a priority for the organisation. And then considerations do need to be made by the SLT, the senior management team, about other activities that you've got going on over the year or over the period of time for the project, to make sure, do we really need to do those this year? And how is that going to affect us, and what does that affect on our resources as well for the people who are involved in the project? But that priority setting at the beginning of the project, I often recommend, when I'm talking to the sponsor before we're even kicking off, to say, has something been sent out? Is something planned to be sent out? It needs to come from the highest level, ideally, and then be filtered down. And then from then on, I normally encourage to ensure constant and consistent communication for the subject matter experts to make sure that they put the project on the agenda for their team meetings, so it is discussed with the wider teams. And also sometimes, depending on the size of the organisation, encourage the project lead to go into those team meetings every quarter, so they can just touch base, ask, provide any information or be a point for any questions that are being asked. Because it has to come from the top, but then at the same time, everybody on the day-to-day jobs, they need to know what's going on and be informed at the right level with the right information. So communication, priority setting are the two key points, as well as identifying your resources.
Yeah,
sorry,
that's fantastic. And so you've kind of answered a lot of this, but because we said before around people just focusing on the tech side of the project and not on the people, and focusing on the people side of things, and you've kind of touched on how you approach that, but just wondering, is there any other points in that, or do you think it's, and I'm interested in your opinion on this, that it's good to have one dedicated person responsible for communication around the people change management side of things, or do you think it can be a couple of different people? I kind of wonder what your sort of thoughts on that are.
I think ideally it needs to be managed by an individual person, just so then they've got oversight of the full plan, whether it's internal or external communications. Sometimes that is split, and that can be quite easily split, but I mean somebody just joining all the dots up, but then other people getting involved, because they're brought into that process and they can help support it as well, because you might have somebody managing communications, but you want a lot of people on the ground talking about it and talking about it positively as champions as well. So I think, this kind of goes back to what we were saying earlier around the change management work stream, working in parallel. I've just actually come out of an implementation project where one of the key lessons learned was the change management process wasn't in place. It was something that was discussed at the beginning, and it was agreed that didn't really need to be there just yet, but it was never reintroduced, and they really suffered as a consequence of not having that change management. And the team suffered as well, because there's, especially when you've got significant change going on, part of the change management work stream can really help, especially like supporting the teams with their different ways of working. Some people are susceptible to it and happy to do that and want to explore that and really keen. Other people are very much like, but this works fine. I like this. And normally it's because, well, I know that this takes up 2 days of a week of my time. So if I suddenly don't have to do this job, what does that mean for me? So it is really important that we've got that work stream to support that. But giving the team's support is so important. Often going back to the resource issue, the teams will have backfill, but the biggest challenge we have is that they don't want to come away from their daytime job. It's just relinquishing the control of having that their job being managed or their roles being completed by somebody else. They keep dipping back into it. They can't help it, which is understandable, but it's again supporting them to make sure that they focus on the project. But quite often in projects as well, project fatigue is a term, and I put in inverted commas, but it's often used, but it is real. People do get exhausted, and sometimes they get to a point they can't see the end of the tunnel. So again, that work stream can really help them into that, as well as feed into the communications to help support.
Perfect. Then thinking about the technology partners, what do you find important when you're establishing that relationship with a new technology partner at the start of the project?
Yeah, really important stage for your project, without putting too much pressure on anybody who's going through that at the moment. But I'd say a couple of key things really is to have good chemistry with them. Sometimes it isn't an actual factual, you can write it down on a box to say 1 to 5. Sometimes it is a feeling, and you think they're going to fit in well culturally with us. They speak the same language as us, and actually they don't use acronyms. I can understand what they're saying. Simple things like that make a difference, because you're going to have to be working with them for the next 12, 18 months. So being able to understand them is really important. We don't see this often. A lot of the partners that we work with are very kind of at a level where they can talk to the client and we can all understand them. So that's a really good thing. But it is just making sure that you're on the same wavelength as them as well. But do your due diligence. I've had partners in the past, I'm going to do the references later. I'll do it next week and I'll do it the week after. And then quite often they'll go through the partner selection and they never done their references. I know one client I was working with really insisted to the point where I think I was quite annoying the sponsor, but really insisted that they did their references, and they did. And they actually excluded a couple of the partners purely based on the references. So that's how powerful that part of the process can be. So that would definitely be one of my top tips. But also with partners, they're very much focused on the solution, very much focused on the tech, which is great. That's their expertise. That's where we need them to be. They do have a project management function, and a lot of the functions can work really well with a lot of the partners that we work with, but sometimes the governance and the approach and their ways of working, they need to kind of tie in with yourselves and with your PM as well. So right at the beginning of the project, it's always making sure, as part of establishing a relationship with them, is the PM sits down with them and really kind of talks about that and how we're going to work through this project and make sure that it is. Because the partner will have a certain way of working. We've all heard the different agile, waterfall methodologies, etc. They'll have their own. Typically, they will work with you, but it is really important that they understand how you work as well and what you're willing, how far you're going to be stretched. If you're going to go and embark on an agile project, that's often, from what we see, quite a different type of project. And a lot of our organisations we work with are not quite set up for those. Doesn't mean that they can't be. We've definitely implemented some very successful projects in the past with the agile methodology, but it's just making sure you're prepared for what that means. So definitely take some time to talk to the partner about that. And I suppose my final point on this is what I mentioned earlier, is they are a trusted partner. You're invested in a lot of money with them. Trust them. They do know what they're doing. They've done it many, many times. And it's just making sure that you listen to what they have to say. They do have a responsibility to get your buy-in and make you understand why it is that they're doing things in a certain way, but definitely trust them and understand what it is that they're doing and work with them.
Yeah, absolutely. I also really like your point about the different methodologies, because I think people often don't even consider that and the implications it's going to have. Are they set up to work on the different methodologies? And sorry, Lisa, I was going to say that one of the biggest things that we hear the technology partners saying all the time is that clients just don't make decisions in a timely manner, and it's delaying things. Is there anything that you would sort of do or recommend that can try and help prevent this?
Yes, this definitely does happen. Back to the sponsor role again, making sure that the sponsor is empowered, because initially at the beginning of the project, they're the ones that are going to be liaising with the sponsor to make, with the partner, to make sure they're in, and the partner will be introduced to the team, etc. But making sure that they can make decisions. So really, when you're actually forming a project team and you're embarking on an implementation project, one of the key questions I always ask a sponsor at the beginning is, what's the project board going to look like? So we need to get a project board in place, because that's where the decision making is normally happening. But then also agreeing the parameters when a decision needs to be made to a project board. Sometimes it might be something really simple, anything that is a change request, which includes a scope change or a cost, that will go to the board. It might be that it's milestones, for example, especially in an agile project, you're hitting those key milestones, and even for waterfall as well, going back to the board to make sure that we're providing progress. Now, we do that monthly anyway, but it's just making sure you've got the parameters in place about when we need to get a decision back to the board and when the sponsor is empowered. So it's really important to get that clear at the beginning. It is also really important for the sponsor to understand their SLT or their senior management team and know how best to effectively manage that team. So preparing them, making sure there's no surprises. No surprises is a key thing, is making sure that whenever you go into a board meeting, they should expect the update that you're providing them. Not, by the way, we're now going red. They should know it before we go in. They should be prepared for it. Just as the partner and the project manager should be prepared going into those meetings as well. So then when we get to a decision, it's very quick and it's very easy. It's preparation for any decision that needs to be made. Also, just coming back to the MSA, so one of the key decisions as well is the contract. So the master services agreement is the contract that you sign with the partner. But again, making sure that that's in place, because that can be sometimes those decisions haven't been made on the contract, can actually be a stopper for any project. And I think also just generally, there are going to be ups and downs. I think there's going to be some levels of frustration, but again, work with the partner, ensure that they have robust governance and controls in place before selecting them. It's the focus in the partner selection is easy to be swayed by looking at the functionality, concentrating on the costs and picking at the costs on certain areas, but make sure you take a step back and ask them, how do you work? What's your culture like? What's your methodology? And what controls do you have in place? And give them a scenario. If we're not hitting the milestones in the project plan, what are you going to do to come back to us and present a new plan? What considerations are you going to make? And what would that look like? Just to make sure that when we do, if that situation ever does occur, what does that mean? And making sure that they're going to give you reassurance if those situations occur. It will help provide a good working relationship, because again, you'll be prepared and you'll know what to expect from them.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we've got some great questions coming in, so I'm conscious of to make sure if we can try and get through a couple of them. As you know, Lisa, one of my favorite topics, data migration. It's always a challenge. Any key tips for you around that, around the start of the project?
Preparation. So at the earliest point, if you're, it doesn't matter what stage of the project you're in, if you're doing requirements or much earlier, absolutely start thinking about your data, export your data, identify any of the typical issues such as your duplicates, your commas that shouldn't be in certain fields, etc., and start cleansing this. If you know that you've got duplicate email addresses, start working through that, start contacting your clients to get that cleansed, etc., because that can take a while, but absolutely get that in place. The second point is data retention. Really, really important to understand, when you want to delete your records, what the rules are and what the rules you've got in place. You may have a data retention policy, but make sure you review it, because as part of this project, every time we look at a data retention, something normally has to change. But also, what data do you want to migrate? Because when you're migrating the data over, you may not want to take your full data set. And actually, quite often we suggest that you don't. So if you've got historic data, there's normally other ways that you can hold that data and you can store it, you can still be the owner of it, and you can still report from it, but you just don't need it in your main data base on your new CRM. It doesn't need to be migrated across. So again, a good PM should be talking to you about that. The partner will be talking to you about that. Make sure that you are discussing data migration in your discovery sessions. But really, that should be one of the key topics of discussion as part of the partner selection, as well as the implementation. The other point, I'll be quite quick, is skill sets and attitudes and behaviours, etc. So again, it's really important that you do have a data lead. Some of the organisations, they will have responsibilities for data across the teams, which actually works really well if that happens. Sometimes it would just be one person. But if it is one, you need one person to oversee everything. But that one person as well absolutely should be bringing in the business teams as and when they are reviewing the data, and make sure that those business areas have ownership and oversight of that data as well to make key business decisions. I've seen it time and time again where you've got the data lead making the decisions, thinking they know the processes and they understand the data. They do understand the data, but they don't necessarily have a full oversight of the business needs. So that's my key point there.
Perfect. And then I know you've touched on project governance before a bit, but is there, and I know this is a really horrible question, is there a baseline that you think should be put in place around governance?
Yeah, all the documents that you talked about. To be honest, the documents shouldn't really form a focal point for a project, because your PM should have those managed. And actually, if they have to keep putting them out, I'd say that something's not quite right. They should just be done, and they should be tracked, and you should just rely on your project manager to do those. It's when issues occur or when decisions need to be made, things get pulled out, but that should be it. So making sure you've got very clear governance controls in place is important, but your project lead and your project manager should be able to manage those effectively. But, you know, really importantly, other things is, you know, the board and having a clear route of escalation. It should be very clear about who will be reporting to who, or who will be feeding into who, and who's communicating to who. So that's really important. Who is the team? And then if there's any responsibilities within that team, has to be very clearly highlighted. Some of the key ones would be, you know, everybody normally make sure that they let their project lead, their product owner and the PM know all the information. There's ways of doing that through meetings, etc., regular consistent meetings of that communication, but also making sure that the team in that project team also communicate to the wider audience in your organization, and they filter down and make sure that's communicated. So roles and responsibilities essential for project governance as well, and as I mentioned, the project board and having stakeholders being managed by your sponsor.
Perfect. And finally, before I bring in some of the questions, any top tips? I mean, you've given loads, but is there one or two key ones that you think or you'd like to just re-emphasize or that are important to share? Okay,
focusing on implementation, but what I would say is get your partner selection right. Do take the time to read the proposal, make sure that you understand, make sure you've got your chemistry with your partner, make sure that you've got that gut feeling with them as well. A lot of focus is on cost. I totally understand that. It's normally the number one, it has to be. But, you know, getting that feeling from the supplier, making sure that they are going to cover everything that you need and they are responding to your questions sufficiently. Getting your partner selection right is really, really important. But also review your contract. I don't think I need to say anything more. I've mentioned that a few times. But the project approach, the methodology, absolutely as part of your partner selection, making sure that it's understood what that approach is going to be like and making sure that it fits within the organisation needs. Strong communication is key, whether it's within the project, communicating within the team, make sure everybody's got the updates and they're not having to sift through emails. It's personal, not habit of mine, a personal bugbear of mine, having to look through emails because of people's updates. It should be in a collaborative space. It should be transparent and aware. Everybody on the project team should have access to that. But really strong communication there, as well as to your internal teams, but also to your external members. One of the key lessons learned I've had from one of my most recent implementations is there was not the right skill sets within the organisation to do effective external communications. And that was only really discovered right at the end of the project. So it was a bit of scrambling around from the teams to actually get something together. It was fine, but it wasn't ideal and it was quite stressful for the team. So it's just make sure that's planned for. And change management, we're seeing it time and time again, the impact that it has on the users. They could have a really great experience on projects. One of the things I always like to achieve as a personal goal in all my projects is to make sure that the team have a positive experience in this project and they're not put off for going on to any other projects in the future, because it's good fun, really.
Exactly. It is hard work, but it's good fun. I like that. So conscious of time. So one of the questions, Lisa, and actually this is a really good question, is would the discovery stage happen after the contract is signed? Most technology partners would not commit to a deep dive into the project such as the discovery stage without paying for this service. I know you have a lot of experience in this, so I wonder what your thoughts on that.
Yeah, absolutely. They typically won't until your MSA is signed. Some suppliers, depending on the relationship they got with you, depending on the size of the project, I suppose they'll have their own parameters. They may, as a goodwill gesture, knowing that they're working with the client, they're trying to get the last few bits done, they may allow for discovery to start. But no, that's why getting the contract signed at the earliest opportunity is so important and key, because otherwise it kind of starts off on the wrong tone if that's not signed off. Does that answer that question?
No, yeah, I think so, yeah. One of the other questions is, when leading on a project, I quite often have to rely on others to do specific tasks in order for areas to progress. I'm struggling at the moment with this not being done. When I offer support for the task, they don't take me up on it, but it doesn't get completed themselves. Any advice to handle this? I know, Lisa, you've come up against this a lot.
We do. Normally it requires like a one-to-one. So first of all, as a project manager, as a third-party project manager, so we can't manage the team to the depths of other things that they may have going on. So we normally bring the project lead in as well, so we can get a sense, and then if needed, escalate to the sponsor. But the problem's still the same. But what we tend to do straight away is have a one-to-one with them to find out what the issues are, what are the barriers stopping them from achieving that. There are some key parts of a project, for example, writing test scripts. They've never normally done this before. So we do a lot of preparation up front and give them a lot of guidance about how to do that. And literally, I personally will just have a session with the team, and we'll actually write scripts together so they can get into their groove, really. And then there'll be a review, and there'll be plenty of support around them doing that. If it's a very specific action that needs to be done and it's once in the blue moon and they're struggling, I'll find out what are the barriers, what's the things that's stopping them from completing it. Do we need to bring somebody else in to help them? And I'll make it clear on what the timescales are and what the impact is if they don't get certain things done. But then, you know, if they're just being obstructive, which unfortunately does happen at times, that's where I will escalate to sponsor. But I normally say to that person, if you can't get it done, I've offered you support, I'm trying to work with you. I am going to have to escalate this to your sponsor because I don't know what else I can recommend. But 9 times out of 10, it normally gets the problem sorted. There's other people coming in with support and help them, because it's usually a confidence problem from their point. They've never done this before and they're out of their comfort zone. So just spending a little bit of time with them, I always find resolves the issue. Yeah,
absolutely. Another good one here, and actually this is something that we do see happen in projects a lot. How do you reset a relationship with a partner who was signed on by a previous staff team? So in this example, it was 75% of the 4 staff team for the whole organization has changed. So where, you know, there's been a big change in staff, but the partners have already been brought in, kind of that resetting that relationship, how, you know, because in essence, they haven't brought that partner in from the start.
So sorry, is this, beg your pardon, was that because the staff has changed or the partners changed? The staff has changed. Yeah, so this is a regular occurrence. This absolutely does happen, not quite to that amount, I have to say, but it does happen. What I tend to do is, as people come in and out of the project, I'll do a reset. So where we do a kickoff right at the beginning. So we do a kickoff with our SLT or with the sponsor and the project lead and the key stakeholders there. But I'll always do a kickoff on the first project team meeting, which is a little bit more detailed and relevant for the team. So I usually go through those slides with them again. So that's, what is this project? What are we trying to achieve? What are your roles and responsibilities? What is it's going to be expected from you from this project? What we need from you? And here's the support that you're going to get for this project. So that's what we normally go through. And then depending on where we are with the project, I'll give them an update. This is where we are. This is what needs to be done. This is the information. And then ask them to review any kind of key recordings we've got, any key documents that we may have. And then normally I do a follow-up with them just so they've got an opportunity to ask any questions. So that's how we typically manage those kind of scenarios. But it does happen, but it can happen. It doesn't have to impact the project. I always find actually getting a fresh pair of eyes in the middle of a project is actually a good thing at times.
Yeah, and I suppose also as well for getting the partner as well to kind of represent to the newer team as well, to show that they understand, you know, what it is they're trying to achieve as well. Like, you know, would you think that's an important element as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Introducing them to the partner, so the partner understands who they need to contact as well, and make sure that they're brought into all the communications, etc. So I suppose that was a given from my part. But yeah, absolutely, you would make sure that it's very clearly understood by the partner, and you do an introduction with them.
Yeah, and interesting, just a conversation I was having with somebody yesterday about understanding the benefits of the project, but making sure that the partner can vocalize the benefits you're trying to achieve on the project as well, you know, so that everybody's kind of on the same page. One interesting question. I know my opinion on this, but I'm going to get you to cover it first. So we're focusing on external supply relationships. Any tips on interdepartmental projects involving a large number of colleagues, everybody with a day job?
Yeah, so this is a project with other interdepartment projects going on. comes back to priority setting. It's really difficult, I know, but it has to be very clear from SLT what are the priorities. And then if there are other interdepartment projects that are a lesser priority, it's everybody in a knowledge and understanding of what's going to come first, especially because I would imagine if you've got a lot going on, there'll be shared resources as well. So if you're asking somebody for a meeting, you're trying to set things up and they've got a meeting elsewhere, do they drop that meeting to come along to yours, or what's the priority? So it's really being very, very clear on what those priorities are. However, it can be successfully done as long as those interdepartment projects have a plan and they stick to that plan. Because then if we're coming in as an example for a CRM project, whilst you've got all these other projects, first thing we'll want to know is what's your plan? When does it start? When does it finish? Who's involved? And then what we can do at those early stages when we're planning is we can look at that and potentially we can work around it. So it can work quite harmlessly, but everybody needs to work together on those, and it becomes a little bit of a program, and there needs to be some oversight of where those touch points and dependencies and constraints are across those interdepartment projects. But where you do have a significant change project going on, they're the kind of things we'd normally say, like, do you need to do some of these other projects right now? How key are they to your organisation? And actually, is it something we need to consider not doing or putting on hold for the time being?
Yeah, absolutely, completely agree. And I think the other thing was also talking about some of the more internal projects as well, and that are not necessarily bringing in external technology partners, but that you still follow the same governance approach, the same structure approach, the same project management approach, because that's really, really important on any project, regardless of what the type of project is. It's very important to have that structure. I would thought you would agree with that.
Absolutely agree. And actually even the product owners or the project leads, again, being across some of these so they can have a good idea and they can help influence the planning on the other projects as well, and help influence any priorities that need to take place.
Yeah, absolutely. So Lisa, being very conscious of time and being a good project manager, and we need to make sure that we keep on time. Thank you so much for that. That was really insightful. Sorry we haven't got to all the questions, but we can follow up with any questions anybody else had afterwards. I mean, so, you know, some really good insights from my point of view, looking at the contract. Absolutely, get that sorted out. You know, but think about the people, think about the communication. You know, focus. You know, being everybody clear and focused throughout the project is really, really important. So just want to say, Lisa, thank you again for joining us this morning. That's been really, really useful.
Thank you for having me.
Then I just want to quickly move on to, as I mentioned earlier, we're doing an updated version of our research study, and Ellie, my lovely colleague, has actually put together a QR code for this, so you can scan to open up the survey. We will also send this out to you afterwards, but we would be very grateful if you could take part in the survey, because we will be sharing the results out to the sector once we've completed it. But it gives some really good insights into what's happening, and then to see what can be done to help fix some of those challenges. So if you could fill that in, we'd be very grateful. So just to say again, thank you very much everybody for joining us this morning, and hopefully we'll see you again shortly on another webinar. Thank you.